if you don't have same bank accounts and you decide we're not going to share bank accounts, and then you're really not open about your spending, and there's some perhaps secret spending, or there's, I think that can lead to what other areas of our marriage are secretive. Is there now disunity or maybe distrust when he goes on a business trip or when she goes out drinking with her girlfriends? Like, what other things are going to happen because you're not on the same page with such a important subject of finances? So when it kind of puts doubt in the relationship. Well, what about these other really important subjects, sex or kids or some of these other things? Welcome back to The Donkey
and the Bee,
where men are jackasses
and women are biatches,
where we work together to build an extraordinary life.
Tune in to up your game in your marriage, entrepreneurship, and finances. Welcome back to The Donkey and the Bee with your host, The Donkey, Brett, and the Bee, Laura, where we talk all things marriage, entrepreneurship, and finances. And today, we are going down the finances road again. We like going down this road a lot.
Well, it's all about financial unity, right? So getting on the same page with some of these things. So we're talking about today getting on the same page with your finances, because ultimately it's really kind of two things, right, that lead to divorce. It's your finances and it's sex. And if you can be on the same page with those two things, I think you have a great head start on success in your marriage and ultimately financial freedom and these other things that you are trying to pursue. But really, you do have to be on the same page if you're pursuing these financial goals, because ultimately, you're working against each other potentially, or one person is driven and the other person is kind of a financial anchor. So I think it's super important that you have conversations about financial unity, getting on the same page with spending and with saving, with investing. And I think it's important that we talk about these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So specifically today, we are going to talk about shared financial accounts, so shared bank accounts. And I think that we want to talk about this today because I've talked to so many people in the past few months about this topic, and it's so 50-50 on if they share bank accounts with their spouse or if they don't. And so I think it's an interesting approach to take, and I really want to talk about it with you and get some ideas from you. And also, we pulled some information from some surveys that have been done with married couples. And so we're going to talk about that too. So it's very split, which is an interesting thing. And so we're going to talk about that, talk about what we do, what we think works for us really well. And so I want to share that with you all as well. But before we start off, I wanted to go over a few things that I looked up and I thought was kind of interesting. So looking into these different surveys that have been done with married couples, Yahoo Finance found that separate accounts actually leads to less financial arguments, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that's kind of counterintuitive to me. I wouldn't have thought that.
Me too. That's why I wrote it down, because that was interesting. I wanted it to be a talking point. CNBC said that 43% of couples have joint assets, which is not very much. That's what, 57% don't? Which is mind-boggling to me. That was an eye-opener for me. But the one that I thought was interesting was Berkeley. Berkeley did a study, and their report said that shared accounts actually creates a happier and longer marriage. They said that having shared goals means more happiness. So I'm going to take that to you. What are your thoughts on those surveys, on those results?
So I think the biggest thing that stood out to me was that more than half of couples, at least surveyed in these surveys, show that they have separate accounts. And that's super surprising because we share accounts and we actually came at that all the way from the beginning. And I can remember it being kind of an awkward subject before we got married. Mm-hmm. We had this pastor who was going to marry us, and he sat down with us and went through several different things, like, I don't know, over a few hours, like kind of setting the stage, getting on the same page kind of conversations. And one of those things was finances. And I remember us being like, no, I don't want to talk about it, right? It's a sticky subject. And we were like 20, 21 years old or something like that at the time. And he's like, well, yeah, you should have shared accounts and this and that. And then I was surprised. I'm like, oh, that's what you're talking about? Like, I assumed we were going to have shared accounts. Like, but we had never talked about it. So I guess in that perspective, probably half the population assumes that they're either going to have shared accounts or not going to have shared accounts. And we never thought to have the conversation prior to getting married. We just had an assumption, or maybe I did, but you might have had a completely separate assumption that, you know, we're going to have shared accounts and we're not going to have shared accounts. So I think that whether you're married now, whether you're going to get married soon, you're on your second or third marriage, I think this is a really important conversation. And just because you have done it one way, even during your marriage, doesn't mean that you can't change it. And so I did want to come back to this point later in the conversation about here are some ways that you can change some of these things and you don't have to completely flip the switch. But really, I think the perspective, the underlining purpose of this is unity in the marriage. So if finances is such a powerful subject that creates so much divide potentially, why not get on the same page with these things and get a plan on some of these things? So that's really the approach that we took, is ultimately we want to be united in our entire marriage. So that's on the same page with sex, on the same page with money, on the same page with our kids, with our faith, with our time management, with our goals, right? So many of these different aspects can lead to strife and division in the marriage. So why not have a plan for this? Whether you decide it's best for us to have shared accounts or it's best for us not to have shared accounts, I still think you can come together on both sides of this and create a plan to say, okay, here's how we're going to build greater marriage unity.
Yeah, I think we agree on the big items in our life, right? So the sex, the money, the kids. But I still think that we have our own separate opinion, like lower line opinions on these things that we voice. So it's not like we're robots and we're like, yes, we agree with everything. You know, like I don't want people to think that like that's how it works. It's the big items that we agree on, and then we have varying opinions on like the sub points of that big thing. I just wanted to point that out.
Or perhaps we agreed to a compromise on each of these subjects, not we had the exact same, like we're going to do it this exact same way. No, it was a discussion on these things, and it is an evolving discussion through the whole marriage, and it's saying, okay, well, here's our goal, here's the purpose or the why, and we may or may not be entirely on the same page, but we've agreed to this is what we're going to do. And, you know, whether it be finance, and that's the point of this conversation, we've agreed to, we're going to set our finances this way and then pursue that.
And I think it's embracing the uncomfortable conversations is very important. And so the first time we talked about finances was very uncomfortable, but now that I think about it, I don't know why. Like, we didn't have any money. Like, I don't even know why it was uncomfortable.
We were so poor.
No, seriously. But I think the same thing goes with like kids, how we want to raise kids, and our faith and sex. All those conversations that are very uncomfortable. They are. It's just how it is. But I think embracing those and realizing that you need to discuss these things in order to be on the same page or be on the same trajectory toward that common goal together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if you're not, if you have separate bank accounts or if you have hidden finance, because I think you can have separate bank accounts but still have partially like a shared account, maybe a shared savings or investment account, right? And I think that's totally fine. But if you had completely separate accounts and you did not know what your spouse either income was or expenses were, or you know, it was pretty obvious they had like a sneaker habit and like they were getting shoes, new Nikes every other day, right? Or like a purse or handbag habit, like they're or maybe it's, you know, secret drinking or whatever, right? Like if there's secret stuff there, there's secret spending, that is like seeds that you're planting in your marriage, that it does not take long before these things blow up and they become like, here are some big obstacles that are right here that we now need to handle. And most people actually don't handle it, right? This is the point of this conversation, is how to have these financial conversations, get on the same page. Most people don't. And that's why more than 50% of marriages ended divorce. It's money and it's sex. And I think those actually kind of go hand in hand with this potential for disunity with the finances. If you don't have same bank accounts and you decide we're not going to share bank accounts. And then you're really not open about your spending, and there's some perhaps secret spending, or there's, I think that can lead to what other areas of our marriage are secretive. Is there now disunity or maybe distrust when he goes on a business trip or when she goes out drinking with her girlfriends? Like, what other things are going to happen because you're not on the same page with such a important subject of finances? So when it kind of puts doubt in the relationship. Well, what about these other really important subjects, sex or kids or some of these other things?
I think it's a muscle that you slowly tend to work out, right? And the more you work it out, the more stronger you get. And I think that's kind of like a bad habit in the same way. You start small, you take a little, like you dip your toe in the water and test it out, and you realize, oh, I got away with that. I'm going to put my whole toe in there. And so it's almost like you're retraining your mind to think that it's okay. And so if you're doing that with your finances, saying, I have a shared or a secret account that I'm spending all my Amazon on or whatever it may be, and then you see you're getting away with that, then I think it trickles over to what you said, to your sex life or to whatever else, right? And so it's this muscle that you're building within yourself, actually negatively. It's like self-sabotaging yourself, right? And so I think being aware of that, like I can say from experience that I had a little bit of a shopping problem when we started making a little bit of money because I wanted to redo my whole wardrobe. I wanted to be more of a mature dresser. And so I made the excuse to my mind like, oh, well, I'm a businesswoman now, so I need to dress nicer. I need to spend money on this clothes. And I had my own credit card at the time, the credit card that I first got when I just moved out. And I remember spending a lot of money on it. And he didn't know about it. Brett didn't know about it until there came a point where I was like, crap, I got like $2,000 on this credit card. And because I've been spending money on it and I need to pay it off. And that was kind of a eye-opening experience for both of us. Like, hey, I had this like own credit card on my own. And I was just flexing that muscle of, hey, I'm getting away with this. Oh, look, I can buy this new blazer or whatever it may be. And so it was an awkward conversation that you and I had. And so now, we don't have any credit cards anymore. We don't spend anything on credit cards. So everything is on a debit card and we see it. Both of us sees all the things that we spend. And so it came down to it was breaking our unity within our financial goals. And so being aware of that was hard. It was eye-opening, but I think it was something that needed to be done in order to traject ourselves toward our financial goals. That's
funny you mentioned that. I really don't even remember that.
Really?
That's kind of a shock. I'm like, wait, you were spending money on your credit card?
Yeah. And then I had to pay it off. Remember, like, how much is on your credit card? And I was like, oh, let me look.
Right.
Yeah. So I think a lot of women tend to do that. It's like there's a doormat that a lot of women joke about. It's like, hey, Amazon driver, like leave my packages on the side of the house. Like, so, when the husband comes, you don't see all the packages in the front. Because I think there's I don't know if it's a necessarily true thing, because I know that men spend money too, but I think it's like this thing that women spend a lot of money on Amazon or the clothing store that they like, and there's always packages coming at the door. But yeah, I was doing that, so I can speak from experience. I know what it feels like, and I know mentally what it does to you, and how that can easily creep over to other areas of your life, not just your finances.
Yeah. Okay. So no hidden credit cards.
No,
not allowed.
No hidden credit cards. Nope. We do not have that anymore.
All right. So we both feel strongly that you should have shared accounts, right? There's pros and cons to both sides here. And I think there's clearly times when you should maybe more consider having separate accounts. But for the majority of people, I think it is best for them to have shared bank accounts, really for the sole underlying purpose of creating unity together. And really the perspective I take towards marriage is directly out of the Bible. It's two becoming one. And I think for Laura and myself to really become one, we have to have the same finances. We cannot have separate bank accounts, or else we are literally not one, right? We have to get on the same page with a handful of these core items, core values in our marriage, and finances on the top of that list. So for us to have separate bank accounts, to not know what the income or expenses are on the other person's side, I mean, we're polar opposites. We're actually working against each other. Mm-hmm. That's not unity in the marriage at all. Mm-hmm. And so really there's practical aspects to this to say, oh, we can, avoid fights if we don't know what each other's spending habits are. I think that's BS. I really think that you are separating yourselves and not becoming one. And, I think, yes, there's struggles here. And yes, there's awkward conversations, and potentially like sometimes you just got to get on your spouse and be like, hey, you need to step it up, or we need to get on the same page.
Yeah.
But those awkward conversations are what isn't vital for a marriage. And if you can't have those things because you're, separating yourselves from your finances, I think it's a recipe for ultimately divorce.
I think I'm going to drop a truth bomb and say that is just a sign of immaturity, I think, to have separate accounts because you don't want to argue or create division or whatever it may be, whatever excuse you're putting in your mind. It's very immature, I think. And so, yeah, that's just my stance on that. I think that, I think a lot of people haven't thought that marriage is a unity, to be completely frank. I think there's a lot of areas in people's lives where they think it should be separate and that it's not something to be shared together. And so maybe this is just an eye-opening thing for people to hear, and maybe just self-reflect on yourself. Like, oh, well, what am I keeping for myself? Or what am I creating? Am I creating division within my marriage? Because that's really what it is. It's creating division within your marriage. And it's a slow creep. It's not like it's something that's just like, bam, one at once. But I think that's divorce, right? Divorce is a slow creep. It's like, say there's a line, and it's like the starting line, right, where you get married. And you could be going uphill, right, toward unity together, or you could just be going flatlined, right, slowly creep toward division. And I think that's really what it is. It's that slow creep in that people aren't really aware of until it's like blatant in your face.
Yeah. So when you were talking about this, that people don't see marriage as unity, I had this thought of, okay, well, what do people see it as? And perhaps they see it as a team, like a two-person team, right? You're like a volleyball team, right? A beach volleyball, two people on the team. And your teammate's job is to help you win the game and to support you when you miss the pass, right? Like instead of this idea, the opposite of two people becoming one person, right? Together, now becoming one entity. Instead, it's two entities that work together. And I think there's a big distinction there. And ultimately, if you can become two entities that work together, I think there's a lot. You're going to get through the hard stuff. You're going to really excel in your marriage versus the opposite of if you are two partners on the same team, you're pretty independent just working together on these things. And I think there's a big distinction there. And I think that's why people, they have the 5, 10, 20-year run rate on the marriage, and then they separate because they started working more independent from each other. The team kind of widened apart. They were never actually united together.
So I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. I'm going to talk about exceptions to this rule. I think that we're not blinded to the fact that we know that there are certain circumstances in life that can create a situation where you maybe don't want to have shared accounts, or maybe need to wait a little bit before you have shared accounts. So I think that the number one thing I can think of, and I know you have maybe a few more thoughts on this, is if your spouse has a problem with spending. Like they literally have a problem with just spending money daily, all the time. They need to spend money on something. And so I would say that maybe in that circumstance, I don't know if you need to build up the trust first or help them through that problem that they have before you have all shared accounts or a shared account with that spouse.
That's true. There's also second marriages, third marriages, right? You've been burned, right?
Yeah.
You go through a bad divorce, you lose it all. Your other spouse takes all the money that you worked hard on. I think there's a lot of financial pain that comes, especially
trauma in a way, yeah.
Yeah, and then potentially, financial mistrust that comes in because of these pain instances. So I think there's clearly times when you should not have shared accounts. But I think even if you went that route and you said, hey, this is my second marriage, and I've accumulated these assets and I want to protect them because I've already had this traumatic situation, I still think that you should, for the sake of unity, if the whole point of my conversation is you need to build unity together, and one part of that is your finances, and you still think it's best for your marriage to have separate finances, I would say here's a way to do that. I don't think that you should have 100% of your finances separated. I think that you can have shared accounts on certain things, and then you have the bulk or the majority of your funds in your own personal accounts that are really just for you and you're separating from your spouse. Mm-hmm. So I would start here. I think the most important part, right, of finances is getting back to what's the bottom line. What is my personal profit, right? What's my family's profit, right? I have my income, I have my expenses. What is left at the end of the month? Because I want to save that. I want to invest that. I want to come together with my spouse, my partner, to create financial freedom, buying assets, having cash flow, letting this snowball. And how do I do that if we are not on the same page? Now, if practically I think my spouse has a spending issue and I want to separate myself from that, I can understand that in some circumstances. But I do think that creating the goals together, you're only going to get to this place of financial freedom, of hitting your financial goals by doing it together, not by having one person who's gung-ho and one person who's a financial anchor in the marriage, right? So therefore, you got to get some unity together, at least on the end result here, on the savings account, on the sacred account, or the investing money that you have. So if you said, okay, you're going to have your separate accounts, I'm going to have my separate accounts, we're going to spend however we like, I still think that the strategy is let's at minimum create a shared savings or savings to invest account, however you want to set that up. And I would suggest it this way. I would suggest that if you are going to come at it from a team perspective and you're trying to have the goal of let's create unity, maybe not complete unity, but at least the some unity in our finances, then let's say I would do it one of two ways. We're going to put in the same amount, meaning either the same percentage of our income. We said, okay, we're creating this shared savings account or shared investment account. Let's each put in 5% of our income, 10% of our income. Or again, with this same amount or the same dollar for dollar, $500 a month, $1,000 a month. But if you can come to an agreement and say, okay, here is our purpose, our goal financially, we're saving to invest, we're saving to pay off bad debt, right? Let's push towards, okay, we're each going to save 5% or $1,000 a month. And I think that creates a bond and a financial unity. And you actually do create trust in each other in this circumstance where you still may have that freedom of I want my money because it's mine and she wants her money because it's hers. I think you can have that, but at least take the core point or the value of this and save towards your family goals together.
So I'm thinking that people are listening to this thinking, that's great, Brett. That sounds so great for you, but how do I implement it within my life and within my marriage? And so I kind of want to just tell everyone what we do because that's what we do. And I feel like it's easy to tell people what we do because we do it every month. So our finances, we have multiple bank accounts for multiple businesses, and we take a percentage from each of that and put it away. So for instance, 10% of our income, first of all, goes to God. That is very important to us. That's something that we implement, and we also teach our children that as well with their own business. And as far as savings, we have a separate sacred savings account. And what that means is it's not a checking account. It's not something that we can access and we have a debit card to for that flat tire that you get or whatever it may be. It's a savings account that we don't touch, that it just goes straight into, and we just watch it grow and we don't touch it until we're ready to purchase an asset. So I would say that 10% of your income is probably a goal to achieve toward that. I know that may sound like a big number for a lot of people, but if that's too much of your income going toward savings, I would say work your way up, right? Start at maybe 2 or 3% of your income and do that for a little bit and build that savings muscle. And then work your way up to 4%. And just, it's a slow increment, right? It's not like an automatic, like, bam, you're going to put 10% of your income into the savings. Like, you're going to get really discouraged and you're probably going to give up. It's like a diet, right? And so I would recommend starting small and just kind of slowly building that up as you go, but creating an account that you cannot touch. I think that's an important thing to say. So it may even be a separate bank that you normally bank at. Say you normally bank at Wells Fargo or something. Maybe find a local bank and have your savings account at that bank. So it's kind of a more inconvenience for you, because if it's more inconvenient, you're less likely to go and spend that money. So that's something that we did when we first started, is had a whole separate bank account at a whole separate bank, just to make it a little more difficult for us to tap into that.
Yeah, so that's what I term the sacred account. And I want it to be inconvenient for me. I don't want to jump on my bank app on my phone and be like, oh, I have, it's the 25th of the month and I'm out of money in my checking, so let me transfer an extra $500.
Yeah.
I don't want to be able to do that. Whether it's, an IRA or a 401k, if it's provided by your employer. For us, we own our own businesses, so we don't have that. We just, again, like Laura said, created a sacred account, split money into that account and let it pile up. And we buy real estate. That is our thing. And this goes back to our common goal, right, of creating unity. We have written out goals for our finances as well as other areas of our life. And specifically, even if we did not have shared accounts on our spending, right, the more of the wants category, we can at least come together on the goal of how do we invest together? How do we create financial freedom together? So I think that's a really important distinction. And to talk about this idea of splitting, ultimately, we do this with our personal, we do this with our businesses. We have an income account, and it's an account that all of our income comes into, right? So when we make sales or when we have a paycheck, income comes into that account. And if you're not sharing accounts, I think you can set this up in this way to take baby steps towards financial unity together, right? So you have your salary, you get paid, and then I would say, okay, from there, let's split that into probably 3 different categories. And I think of it this way. I think of it as wants, and investing, right? So let's talk about this here. Your needs. You need to pay your bills, right? Your rent, your mortgage, your utilities, your car, your phone bill. A lot of those are fixed numbers. You know exactly every single month it's, $3,300 for this category. So perhaps if you have separate accounts that you each say, okay, I'm going to, of this $3,300 of our fixed bills, let's put a shared account here. And let's say, okay, I'm going to contribute half of it, you're going to contribute half. Or it's going to be, I'm going to contribute $2,000, you're going to contribute $1,300 based on a fixed amount or based on a percentage, right? You're going to cover the mortgage, I'm going to cover the insurance and the utilities. Let's throw that money into this account every time you either get paid or every month, right? You can split money into this shared account, which is fixed for bills, right? Because you got to pay this money no matter what. Then you have the second account, which is more of your wants. This is restaurants and all your fun money and everything that you want to do. If you wanted to create separate accounts and have separate, your freedom of your own spending money, then I think that's totally fine. I would keep it in the wants section of your budget, right? Everything that I want to do for myself is nothing to do with my spouse. They're going to do their thing, right? The majority of the funds are in this wants account, which is my personal account. So I have my fixed bills. We can do in a shared account. My second account would be a personal account. It's just me, not my spouse. And then the third account is that investment account, or it's a savings account, right? We talked about this idea of the sacred account. So that would be the most important part of this, is ultimately, how do I get to a place of early retirement, financial freedom, and having these goals together? And we're going to take that account and, again, either contribute the same, right? Either that's the same percentage or the same dollar amount to be able to do that there. And ultimately, I think if you can kind of split it into those 3 accounts of, needs, wants, and investment, then it is kind of simple, and it allows you to have the freedom of, I want to have my own bank account. You can have that for all of your needs. Your bills got to get paid, right? So you might as well just split that off together and put money in there. And then you still should have some goal towards your financial growth. So let's split that off and let's put that together as well.
Mm-hmm. We did discuss this a little bit in our past episodes. our first, I'd say 6 episodes, we talked a lot about finances, but specifically episode 6 is titled Take Control of Your Finances. So if you want to hear more on that, I would look back on episode 6. We'll break this down a little bit more.
Well, that is it for today. I want to encourage you to get on the same page with your spouse, have the awkward conversations, get into the money. And ultimately, if you want to have separate accounts or you currently do have separate accounts, how can you take some action steps to be able to get towards the purpose, the underlying purpose of creating unity in your marriage, right? Can you take 2 additional steps? Can you create an account for your investing, for your saving, to pay off bad debt? Can you create an account to cover your bills, your fixed expenses, and then still have your freedom there? So if you are currently already sharing your accounts, I think that is the best way to go. I think that you can come on the same page with marriage unity and ultimately be able to be united in this hot topic of finances, right? It's the biggest way to create divorce is by getting off page with finances. So I think it's so vital that you get on the same page with your spouse on shared accounts.
Thanks again for joining us on an episode of The Donkey and the Bee. Click subscribe below for any new content that we release. We'll see you on the next one.